Lisa Parshley is an Olympia council member, respected veterinarian, longtime small business owner, and community leader in Olympia. She is running for the office of state representative for Legislative District 22, position 2. Lisa holds a PhD in biochemistry, is a doctor of veterinary medicine, and a board certified oncologist for animals. She was a long-term co-owner of Olympia Veterinary Specialists. And as a member of the Olympia City Council since 2017, Lisa has served on multiple committees, commissions, and boards, including the Finance Committee, Thurston County Climate Mitigation Steering Committee, and the Lot Board of Directors. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to share more about yourself, your campaign, and what you would hope to accomplish in the legislature if you were elected. Would you like to give us an introduction, anything you'd like to share about your campaign and what you're working on?
Well, first, I would like to thank all of you. In past elections, when I haven't been on the ballot, I've always looked to Olympia Indivisible and where the opinions are coming from. And I'm a member of Olympia Indivisible, and I value the work you've done. I've seen what you have done for other candidates and thereby what you have done for our community. So it is valuable to me, and it's an honor to be here tonight. If my puppy gets too loud, I can put her out of the room. I apologize for this. Why am I here? Well, it's the same reason I ran in 2017. I was raised with the understanding that you had to give back to your community, that you absolutely, the best way to do this is to lift everyone up, and that we would always be judged by how we treat and what we do with those that are the least in our community, never by who is the best. So if you're going to do that, you have to get in there and roll your sleeves up, and you have to actually do the work. This is not new to me. I have worked for the veterinary profession, both as the president of Washington State Veterinary Medical Association. I have worked for the American Veterinary Medical Association, working with the EPA, the USDA, FDA, and I have also worked for the state on the Hazardous Drug Advisory Committee to try to make sure that staff are safe if they're working with these hazardous drugs. So giving back to your community has been ingrained in my life. And I think I'll take you back to 2016 in November when we had that fateful election. And I woke up that Wednesday morning and realized I needed to stand up and take care of my community, because with the President Trump, we were no longer going to be able to have a certainty the federal government was going to help the states and our local government. And I had just found out that we were going to have an open position on Olympia City Council. So I stood up and I ran for it. It has been a passion of mine that has only grown in the 6+ years I have been on City Council. During this time, we've had 5 declared emergencies: homelessness, housing, opioid epidemic, racism as a health crisis, and I actually wrote and authored and got passed climate declaration of emergency. During this time, we also had a pandemic. And during this time, myself and Clark Gilman and Jim Cooper passed a hazardous pay for grocery workers who were essential workers who lost their hazard pay 1 month after the declaration of a pandemic. We also ensured that they got PPE because the same company stopped paying for PPE 1 month afterwards. During this time, we also had the murder of George Floyd. And it was my great honor to work with Jessica Bateman and Jim Cooper and pass the very first Thurston County Human Rights Commission, which we now call the Social Justice and Equity Commission. We also tasked them, once we got this formed, their first job was, what does effective police oversight that would help regain the trust in our police department? They have just finished this plan. Our community livability and safety has heard this plan. It is coming to council this summer. I cannot wait. It's long overdue, but we're finally doing this. And what's even cooler is the Olympia Police Department sat at the table and helped us build this plan. Dobbs, shall we say Dobbs? When we heard the rumor that it was going to get Dobbs was going to happen and that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned. I was on the steps of the Capitol with Jessica Bateman and the governor. And when it actually happened, I called the city manager that morning and I said, I can't live with myself. I can't see my nieces go back to what I fought for in the 80s. I have to do something. I am going to write a resolution with Dante Payne and Ian One, and we are going to do several things. The first is we're going to extend sanctuary city status to include reproductive health. We were the very first jurisdiction in the state of Washington to do it, the second in the United States. Seattle followed us 2 weeks later, and then following session, Washington State followed us. We also guaranteed that we would find ways to use a lump sum of money to help those that are providing accurate, real reproductive health care, not the faux ones that are trying to divert people from exercising their choice. And we're in the process of working with Planned Parenthood and several other clinics to see how we can spend that money. In the last few years, we have seen some amazing work done in the city of Olympia. Homelessness. Jessica covered that very well. But what a lot of people don't realize is the community developed plan called the One Community Plan has generated a plan that had Cheryl Selby invited by the President Biden's administration on homelessness to go present in Washington, D.C., our One Community Plan. So while we have a long, long, long way to go, our plan has been nationally recognized as one of the top. We've also been working on our housing projects. We're land banking very fast and furious. Jim Cooper and our whole council was able to bring in a regional effort called the Regional Housing Council. It's a model for the rest of the state. We need every county pulling one of these together because we will get more housing and homelessness work done if we not just one city at a time, but a region at a time. And then our work on Journey to Jobs. How many of you know Journey to Jobs? It's the piece that we don't always talk about in housing and homelessness. And the first thing is, if you look at Danny Heck's report on housing, we need to build housing. We've talked about this. Jessica talked about this. We need to stabilize people and get them indoors and get a door to shut behind them with a roof on it. But we need to be able to build the workforce. We need skilled labor. I've been working the last 2 to 3 years with the Port of Olympia lot and the City of Olympia and our ARPA money on Journey to Jobs, as well as trying to convene a group to bring together the players in the game, the teachers, the educators, and the jurisdictions so that we can build the capital to build a regional skilled labor training center. It's the third leg on a three-legged stool that we don't talk about in climate, housing, homelessness, and all of our issues currently, including the diversity and equity. Journey to Jobs has put 120 people through the pre-apprenticeship program. 22 people have landed permanent full-time jobs. A portion of the rest are in apprenticeships and a portion of the rest are in part-time jobs or seeking education. Most of these people came out of our tiny homes. So we're giving them back their respect of having a job, something that they can call their own. It's one of the pieces that we want to build. And they, in turn, by paying for this pre-apprenticeship, getting them jobs, they're giving back to their community. They're more than repaying the amount of money, but we need to find a way to fund this further. That's currently what I'm doing. And I'll end with this. All of this is summarized best by Oli Strong work. Oli Strong was a process that we started 3 years ago that said, what would a sustainable, resilient economy look like for our region? We found 4 things: living wage jobs, housing, food security, and childcare. We need to work on all 4 of those things in the legislature. We need to see this as our priorities. We need to rebuild a middle class and lift everybody up, because if we do that, we will have a sustainable, resilient economy. Everything that Representative Jeff Bateman was talking about fits into those 4 things. One of my big pillars is working on the living wage job and all of the workforce shortages we have that's impacting everything that we are, all of our issues. Why am I running for LD22? Because I know the issues. I understand the issues. I've worked on trying to build actions and policies. I know where the gaps are, and I know where the local jurisdictions are actually leading the state and need help. So I want to bring this understanding to the state legislature. I want to work with the two amazing Representative Dolio and soon to be hopefully Senator Bateman to back them up on climate work, housing. I want to be able to be that person in the legislature using my understanding, my knowledge, and the fact that I've worked on all of these issues and give back to my community. I really do. This is a true passion because I know if we lift everybody up, all of us are going to be better.
Thank you so much for sharing that introduction and an overview of the work you've been doing. It's very impressive. I think we'll start off on workforce development because that's, as you said, that's a focus for you. I was just wondering, you've talked about how you've worked on it in the Olympia area and Thurston County area. So in terms of the wider state, could you talk a little bit about how you would build on the work already being done by the Workforce Training and Education Coordinating Board, and also community colleges in the state that are doing workforce development?
That's excellent, because once I started this campaign, I started to meet all of those people, including an extension officer from Washington State University and Bellingham Port facility, which actually has a fantastic maritime trade training program. And all of the labor have been stepping up and inviting me to their apprenticeship programs. I don't know that I don't want to reinvent the wheel. This idea was brought to me by the professor from Washington State University. He said that what's happening right now in the state is individual regions are reinventing the wheel and copying other regions. He thinks that what we should be doing is pulling together these different regions and say, okay, Bellingham, you are making a name of maritime trade training. Even though Seattle's trying to, maybe we should be taking and sending everybody who wants to be in maritime trade training. We've got construction trade training going on in Pierce County. We have pipe fitters going on in Lacey. By the way, their program is a 5-year program that I would struggle to pass. It's the equivalent of a bachelor's, if you ask me. So we shouldn't be working, duplicating any of our efforts. I don't think the state should be getting into the education program. They should be saying, how can we be the convener? How can we fill the gaps? How can we build the capital? Another thing that someone gave me, and it was actually from the pipe fitters, they said the state universities build dorm rooms and they're subsidized greatly for the college students. Why are we not building housing for these training programs and subsidizing that? Because when I was standing there, 2 apprentices came in to do their day in their CAD lab, and they both had driven from Longview, Washington to Lacey. That's crazy. We should be providing that. The second thing is, for a lot of these pre-apprenticeship programs are springing up everywhere because the school districts are seeing that more and more high school students are not going to college. We need to have pre-apprenticeships that are baked into the last 2 years of high school, like the New Market school, but they're already out of space. So we need to build them capital. So I'm seeing all these places where the jurisdictions in the state can actually facilitate and help those that are doing it, and also convene people so that we're not reinventing trade training skills and leaving gaps in what we are training.
That makes sense to me. I actually work with a program that works with New Market. So yeah, they are very full.
And they do a good job. And
they do.
So does
they
Pack
do.
Mountain and a whole bunch of others.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. You mentioned building capital. What funding sources would you identify to allow workforce students to access and complete their training and, and get all the resources and support they need?
Well, yeah, that is going on right now for our own journey to jobs. We're looking at what, one of the questions that Jess was asked about regressive taxation. The problem is without fixing that, we won't get progressive revenue streams. But what are some of the options? I've heard such things as carving out a portion if we can prevent 2117 from passing some of the climate commitment work to be able to, the money that is brought in from the carbon offsets, to be able to help with skilled labor training at all levels, because that is only going to grow, especially since the DNR has designated that our forests are not just board feet anymore. They can be listed as carbon offsets. So we should be able to see an increasing revenue stream. As a matter of fact, in the first year that it was in place, we had twice the amount of money than was expected. So if we can pull into some of these, the climate commitment, pull this in, I personally think that's what we should be doing with carbon offsets, is helping make sure that nobody and no community is impacted by climate mitigation, and making sure that we are building a green economy. So that's one revenue stream. And then honestly, we need to roll up our sleeves and tackle that regressive tax system. And if we don't overturn the capital gains, we're going to be 50 out of 50 again. And I will be that voice because I'm the chair of finance in the city of Olympia, constantly saying, when are we going to fix this? We have to fix this, which is why I want to be in the finance committee for the House.
Makes sense. Okay, well, we're gonna shift slightly because obviously you have your people who need to work, but you also need them to be healthy. So from Madeline Bishop, one of our members, will you support a Washington universal system of healthcare for all?
Oh, absolutely.
Wonderful.
But
But go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have been for it since, well, forever. I can't think of a time that I haven't been for it. And just as a side note, if I can, in England, they're thinking about putting veterinarians as part of the single payer plan, which would mean that all the pets in England will be able to have the same kind of universal care.
Oh, that's really interesting. What legislation would you put forward or support that would help the state move toward a universal healthcare system? We heard a lot from Jessica. It'd be good to hear how you would plan to support that.
Well, I've always believed, I think it was Elizabeth Warren who brought this up, that if we're going to go universal health care, we need to go through the Medicare and Medicaid system, no matter what you call it in every state. So we need to start focusing on what we can do as a state. And Jessica's absolutely right. We're somewhat hamstrung by the federal government on this and how we're allowed to do that. But I think we should be taking every opportunity we can with our own internal Apple Care and so forth to be able to bolster that and prepare to be able to be a single payer. While this doesn't necessarily look at single payer, but I do believe, and I've always believed, that Medicaid, Medicare is one of the top drug purchasers in the United States. We should be leveraging against the drug companies this buying power and saying to them, why is it this same drug produced in the same factory in Canada is half the price? We will pay the Canadian price. And until we get the Medicaid, Medicare coming into that drug conversation, we aren't going to get control of it. You need to get an equal purchasing power to say, no, thank you, and get to the table on some of these drugs. And I can say this because I actually have a patent in my name for a potential drug. And I can tell you that most of these companies are about 10 years beyond the recovery of the cost and a little profit. And when you have doxycycline, who is well out of the patent, being 500% increase every year, sometimes we've got to get Medicaid, Medicare to put their foot down on some of these drugs. And so that's one. And then I do believe we also have to look, and we've got the One Healthcare Plan group, which is a combination of med school, medical, and veterinarians. We need to bring that group back together and look at what is a healthcare plan for the state of Washington, and where can we start plugging away, and how do we leverage our lobbying with our federal entities so we can start getting the federal government into it, depending upon what happens in November.
Thank you. let's see. Uh, Shifting gears again, John Gear was wondering, will you support legislation to give cities, counties, and special election districts, such as school boards, the option of using ranked choice voting and also the option of moving to multi-candidate races with ranked voting to replace polarizing winner-take-all elections that produce proportional representation?
Absolutely.
Same question.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, when Jessica was elected the first time to the representative, we had to appoint a new city council member. And I asked a fair vote to come in with Mary Hall, and we ran a ranked choice selection process for, it turned out, Ian Huen. We did it again this year when Mayor Payne was elected as mayor and had to leave his seat. And I can tell you in that particular instance, it taught me something different. If we hadn't had ranked choice, we would have been a tie, which would have been ugly. It would have drug on and could have gone well late into the night before one of us broke and gave a vote to one or the other of the top two. But because we all agreed and said we were going to do ranked choice, the ranked choice broke the tie before we ever had to get into fisticuffs of who was the better candidate for the replacement. I did testify in the bill that would have made the state, through the Secretary of State, standardize what is ranked choice for the jurisdictions. I strongly believe we need to do that before individual jurisdictions start passing all the different kinds of ranked choice. So I strongly think the state has to step up and take the lead in this and write a good ranked choice regulations for all the county auditors to follow, because there are some bad things about it. But if you are aware of that, and we have people like Mary Hall, and I've been talking to her about it, that can help us avoid some of the unintended consequences and have the state set the standard for all the counties, period.
Great. Sounds like you and Jessica are very much on the same page there. You've also mentioned about climate change and addressing that as a priority for, it sounds like, off of your questionnaire. And in there you mentioned developing a distributed energy grid using solar, wind, and water. What legislation would you propose or support that would enhance the Department of Commerce grid modernization program?
Well, one, there's, for example, I would be looking at trying to get legislation with or without the power companies coming along, where they're required to buy excess methane from water treatment plants. Right now, they won't do it. And yes, you do have to clean that methane. I do understand that, but there are processes to do that. They are also not required to help us connect, like with a community solar in our region, to the grid with that. I think we need them to be more of a player in these distributive grids, because I did do the Legislative Energy Horizon Institute through the University of Idaho, which is looking at energy and energy production in the future and what kind of policies we need. The major stumbling block to green energy production is peak demand. So we need to absolutely make sure that we have adequate different kinds of energy sources, wind, solar. We need to have hydrogen, but not only hydrogen. We need to keep our hydro. And if we're going to take the dams out of Snake, which I'm for, we need to find a way to supplement that very green energy. We need to keep our nuclear power plants continuing, even though I'm not for nuclear power plants, but they are fairly green until we can figure out what to do with those cores. And we need to distribute all of this with wind. We have barges off the coast of Washington that are using the wave action to create hydrogen. So we need to build a distributive energy production system for the state of Washington that can also potentially be sold. For example, the other thing we could do with all the water treatment plants that are dumping freshwater effluent into the Puget Sound, the electrical current generated between freshwater and saltwater can actually power some of the plants and generate even some excess electricity. So we need to start looking at every single corner we can find, and then we need to find a way to start storing it, battery storage. And that's where hydrogen probably is going to have its best heyday, is its excess. When we have excess energy production, we put it into hydrogen and we store it. And then when we need it, it comes out. And then lastly, I think we need to require that the power companies do on demand, two things, on bill funding of retrofits for people's houses for energy efficiency, which allows them to pay off those retrofits through their own power bill, and be able to do, I think it's called on-demand energy use, where you get rewarded for running your dishes in the middle of the day at work, or your laundry in the middle of the night. Because in the Legislative Energy Horizon Institute, we were all given certain different forms of energy production, and we were supposed to get CETA. So we were supposed to be by 2040 and 2050, certain amount of no gas. And how are we going to get there? Every single group failed. And the reason we failed was we did not bring in the public's use and the public's knowledge of when they're using their electricity. It is going to be absolutely 100% required. So we need to get the power companies to start putting in that kind of power meters, so that people can get rewards for doing things at not between 5 and 10 every night, and between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. So that's how we get a distributive grid to work. And we're going to have to legislate some of this, or they won't do it.
Yeah, very true. And you mentioned working with the power companies. I noticed today that there's a wonderful influx of funding around doing things like taking out those dams that you mentioned. A lot of this funding is grant funding going to tribal nations in the area. And I'm just wondering, I was curious about how you see kind of that intersection of looking at hydropower and also looking at salmon recovery and habitat restoration, how those might come together, how they might support each other. It's a complex problem, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I absolutely think we have to support the tribal rights. And I think you're talking about the NOAA grant that Squaxin just got. Yes, I have been 100% getting rid of that Fifth Street Dam. I have never been bashful about that. I think that we need to, I think maybe I'm an optimist, I'm an oncologist. I believe we should be supporting salmon recovery 100%, but I also think we should be working hand in hand with the tribes on how to make sure that we don't take out all the dams and now all of a sudden we're forced to go back to fossil fuel production of our electricity. So I think there's a middle ground, and a way we can not necessarily ease into it, but find our ways around it, like developing our hydrogen storage from the Bonneville. When they're spilling the Bonneville, we should be, instead of spilling, we should be generating every piece of hydrogen we can. So that would be one way to reduce the reliance on the Snake River dams, for example. So I think there are ways, but we need to sit down and talk about it. And I'm 100% for the tribal rights.
Thank you. I just that was a new one today because I just saw that bit of news come out, which is really interesting. We talked a little bit about funding, but I did want to make sure that I gave you John Suzanne's question that was shared with Jessica as well, that we're in support of increasing resources for public education and providing adequate health care for all. But are there additional ways to increase the funding for that? We talked a little bit about funding for other items. I wonder if you have any other thoughts around increased funding
For
for healthcare and for schools. for education?
Yeah, I'm getting an education on that from watching what's happened in Olympia school districts, and I feel like somewhat I'm a backseat driver on that. But I will tell you that the school board members, and including education with Lori Dolan, I've spent many an afternoon with her talking about this. One, I think most immediately we have to defeat the attempt to overturn our capital gains. We absolutely have to do that. Second, we need to go back and with any solution, any policy we make, there's always unintended consequences. We need to go back to the McCleary decision, and we need to go back to that compromise, because there are some school districts that are being impacted by how they're distributing the money and how they are allowed to spend some of their levy money. So we do need to some simple fixes like that without actually increasing more regressive taxes. We could potentially right size this just a little bit for now, and absolutely have to do the capital gains. We have to shoot that down 100%. In terms of the wealth tax, I'm 100% for, and I love the idea of a property tax on the properties that are, above a certain amount, with a tax rebate for those below a certain amount. I am 100% for that. Those kinds of things, I've seen the numbers. For example, if we opened the Constitution of Washington, don't shriek, but if we did and we actually made it possible to have an income tax and take away like sales tax or right size our property tax, we'd actually have more money in our state right now, and the average person in our state would pay less for taxes. So I haven't given up on that. I know that's a optimistic, pie in the sky dream, but I think at some point the state of Washington is going to have a serious conversation about it, in part because I think the pressure is going to come from the local jurisdictions. I've testified on the 1% property cap several years in a row. There was not a single city or county across the state of Washington, Republican, Democrat, Independent, purple, red, it didn't matter, that didn't say in this hearing they are in crisis with their budget. All of these jurisdictions statewide are in crisis, and it's primarily because of our taxing system. And all we're left with is to put in regressive taxes. And that means more and more burden for the lower income and the middle income, and less for the people who could actually afford it. So sorry, I went on a rant on that, but it's frustrating as a chair of the finance committee of Olympia, and look at that we could be laying people off in 2026.
And that nicely segues into us talking about housing again, because when people get laid off, that makes them they get much higher risk of becoming unhoused. What legislative action is needed to address the housing crisis in our state, in your opinion?
Well, I think we need to keep going with what Jessica Bateman's done. I think we absolutely have to build housing everywhere we can within the urban growth boundaries. This is very important, within the urban growth boundaries. And we need to build up. We need to stop being afraid of going up. So some of this could be done through the Growth Management Act. And right now, the city of Olympia is going through comp plan updates, just like every other jurisdiction in the state of Washington. That is an easy tool to be able to say this. Jess's bill on middle housing is just one of them. I think we should start requiring that the cities look at zoning. When we're looking at our zoning in Olympia, it's 50 years of zone after zone after zone. It would be great to say through the comprehensive or the GMA that the cities have to look at only 4 zones, right? And that we look within those 4 zones at low, intermediate, high, and super high. Okay, because right now, the average zone, we were shown something yet last night in city council that within one block we had 3 different zones, even though it was one block in the city, and some of the planners couldn't even figure out where some of that zoning is coming from. So can we reduce the barriers to housing by making sure that our zoning is understandable by the builders who are building market rate housing? One of the things that people don't like talking about is the cities and the counties and the state, where we can affect affordable housing is our land. We can land bank, we can do land trusts, we can do partnerships, we can leverage what we have. But we also have to get out of the way from market rate housing, because people that can afford market rate housing aren't moving into it, which means the young families not moving into their housing. And the first time home buyers can't buy it because we've got a jam up in every level of our housing. When Thurston County, the Thurston Regional Planning came to Olympia to give us our housing needs assessment, they said that we need housing at every single level within it, and that we have to find ways to make sure that we're not getting in the way. It's an understandable development process for our city to build market rate. Then we have to look at how can we leverage workforce, and then how do we leverage our land and our partnerships to build affordable? Because ultimately that's what we have to do as a state. What could we could say that one of the thoughts I've had, because in Regional Housing Council, we could do this. Why do we have 4 different zoning and building requirements between the county, Lacey, Tumwater, and Olympia? Your average developer doesn't know where they're coming from. They have to have different people hired. Oh no, we're building this in Tumwater. So it's a different group of people we're going to work with there. They have different codes, different incentives. Oh, Lacey, we're going to go build in Lacey. It's different incentives. I think we could say in a region, you have to have your codes and your zoning line up so that you can make it understandable to build. So housing, those things. And then lastly, I'm going to go back to my first, we need to get construction trade training done. We don't have enough people to build the housing. If a market rate developer has enough people to build 2 houses in a year, they're not going to build 2 affordable. They're going to build the 2 most expensive houses they can find. And it's gotten so bad that when we got a tour of one of the downtown buildings that's being built for multifamily, it was sitting empty. And I asked the developer, I said, this is only partly done. He goes, well, we don't have any drywallers and we're not going to have them for 2 weeks. So nothing's going to happen in this building for 2 weeks. So we need to get skilled labor training, and we need to work on that. We have a workforce that we can put in there. We got high school students coming out. We got the folks that are in our tiny home villages. We need to get the people helping us build the housing. So 1, work with the GMA, work with the regions, make sure that the cities are land banking, make sure the state's land banking. I have not heard of the state land banking. We got state land that's sitting empty within the UGAs, the urban growth areas. Why are they not land banking it and saying, hey, Habitat for Humanity, come do a project with us?
And linked into that housing issue, I know that one group we've been seeing looking at how to get into housing in Washington State is our individuals and families who can have a reduced access or limited access to gender affirming care in other states. And we're seeing folks come in to Washington because of that. So housing obviously is one way that, one piece of that puzzle, but do you think the Washington legislature should support this historically disadvantaged group? And if so, how could they do that?
Well, 1, I think we should make sure that we amend the bill that they did pass because of that initiative. I think we need to go back in and amend that. So we need to support them in that way. 2, I think we need to make sure that when the Commerce Department is putting out grants for housing projects with cities, that we make sure that a portion of all the housing is going to be with the most marginalized portions of our community, which are the LGBTQ plus and trans communities. They're the people over 65. They're the people of color. We need to make sure that those housing projects, those affordable housing projects, are targeting some of that. And, I'll be honest, we've been just trying to build so fast. I'm not sure we've really focused on that potential ourselves, but, we've got 230 units built since the home fund of permanently affordable housing and another 100 to come that has wraparound services. So yeah, now we can start breathing and going, okay, how do we pull this in and tie money to it, quite frankly.
Great. So sorry, I'm gonna do a left turn on you again. If John Suzanne was also wondering, what would be the single most important legislation that should be passed to reduce gun violence in our society? Same question we had for Jessica.
Well, if I had my way, uh, I would do like England, pie in the sky, that you can't keep your guns even in your own house. They do that. You have to go to a gun club to fire them, but that's not possible. I think that the legislature has done a phenomenal job, and I'm particularly happy with the fact that as a city council, we can finally say who can come in with a gun and who can't. I do think we need to look holistically at the age that you can get a gun. In Montana, believe it or not, you have to show that you've been through a gun education program. Of all states, you would think they're the most loose. I think we should be looking at that. And I think we should go further because I do know that it's open carry in city halls. I would like to see no carry and the local jurisdictions being able to say no guns, because we do that in courthouses. Why can't I do it in the city hall? And I can tell you that we had a riot my first 2 years in city hall, and we had to leave the room. We were escorted out into a safe place. And when the police cleared the room, there was a gun on the floor. So it's not unheard of for that to happen. So I just would say keep going and don't let the NRA come into our state again, because in 2016 they spent the most money that they had spent in any single state in Washington, and make sure that we have enough Democratic legislators that are going to stand up and not take that money, and make sure that we fight against that kind of power that they can bring in.
Thank you for touching on that issue. I apologize because this actually connects back to housing and urban growth again, but I see a question in the chat, so I'm going to take us back there for a moment. Dan and Cindy Tifford were wondering, building as much as possible in the urban growth area is important, but maintaining green space and a healthy urban forest in neighborhoods is also important. How do you think we could balance this?
Absolutely agree with that. I know for a fact that the city of Olympia has bought 560 acres of parkland. I think every city should be required to carry a portion of their urban growth area as actual green space. Absolutely, 100%. I think we should do like Portland, Oregon has done, which is any small corner of the city is going to have a plant in it. Portland, Oregon widely touts the fact they have the smallest park in the world. So we should be looking at that for every city in the state of Washington, that any possible place we can put green, we put green, because it's also carbon sequestration, it's mental health, it's physical health. And we should be requiring a certain portion of I guess the acreage would be green space. You could do that, once again, as long as you're willing to build up and vertical farms and vertical plants. And I've seen some pretty cool pictures about that.
I have two. It's really cool what people are figuring out. Well, that nicely segues over to a little bit more discussion about climate change. We are increasingly hearing from experts that we're running out of time to address the impacts of climate change. What do you think are the most urgent and effective actions that the Washington State Legislature can take in the next 2 to 4 years? We're not talking really long term, but immediately now.
Most effective. Well, one, I think all of us need to vote down on 2117. That's one of the big things. But I a student of ICLEI, the International Climate Group, they said the single most important thing a city can do is densify. I think it goes along with our housing. It goes hand in hand. We need to 100% densify. We need to start really, like Jessica said, I'm a big fan of this, making sure that we don't have sprawl. Okay, we absolutely 100% need to work on that. And if the state has to buy the land, the state has to buy the land, or give the counties money to buy the land, and either set it aside for for farming or for green space carbon sequestration. So I'm going to fall back on that. The second would be to make sure that densified neighborhoods are 15-minute walkable. We need to look at what Jessica said. We actually talked about this last night in council. We need to make sure there's amenities in every single neighborhood. It's all well and good to say we want neighborhood centers, but we need to be able to have every block and every neighborhood be able to have a small coffee shop, to be able to have a small grocery store, be able to have a pub or a restaurant, or amenities of any kind, because then people are not getting in their cars. I think we also should be having cities looking at how they can start eliminating parking. I know that is not popular, but the cities that have actually started to eliminate parking are the cities that are starting to see mass transit become more popular. The reason Portland, Oregon has MAX is because they put a moratorium on parking back in 1979. And it put pressure on the community to say, well, we want to go into town. Well, now they have high-speed train in 3 directions, almost to Salem, going towards Eugene. They have it to the Columbia River. If Washington would agree to a bridge, they'd have it into Vancouver. So we need to start having in our Growth Management Act, having cities looking at how do we reduce an automobile centric community. So densify is probably the most important. Second most important is protecting our rural areas, suburban areas from sprawl. Third is making it not so automobile centric. And then fourth, if the state got into anything, is helping us retrofit our current built environment, which is about 56% in Thurston County of our greenhouse footprint. And 99% of that is already built. So we need to start getting commerce grants to help jurisdictions, to help nonprofits start doing the retrofits on these buildings so their energy efficiency goes up. Electric vehicles, yes, but honestly, we're going to need to look at electric bikes or hope somebody comes along with a very cheap model, like unfortunately being made in China, where the average person can actually afford an electric vehicle. But that's kind of last.
Thank you for that. If you were elected, what would your top priority for the 2025 legislative session be? And what groundwork have you already laid to support work on that priority?
Well, the budget, I have to go back to that because I see the direct impact on the city and the county and my neighborhood cities and around the state. So I agree with Jess on that one. The budget has to be done. We need to make sure that we have a sustainable budget. The next would be I've been actually chatting with several groups about some of the safe workspaces for nurses. Right now, the current laws are such that L&I doesn't require near misses in violence in the hospitals. So they only have to report if a nurse actually gets injured, but that's not the same thing as being held at knife point in an ER, which I've heard about. And yet they didn't actually get injured, but they were held at knife point for 20 minutes. That personally is a behavioral health injury, that mental health injury. So we need to look at some of those things, as well as we need to start getting a grasp on our nursing ratios for the hospitals. We're the 50th out of 50 in the United States in our nursing ratios for patients. That's just shameful. It's sort of like our tax system. Oregon and California have passed nursing ratios that are safe for patients. I would really like to look at some of these things. And then lastly, I think we need to look at the 3 initiatives we did pass through because we knew we needed to amend them. And it would be faster to do that than waiting 2 years if they got passed by the initiative system. So we need to go look at those, roll up our sleeves and see what needs to be fixed on them.
Well, thank you so much. I am not seeing any more questions in the chat, but Ed, have you seen anything else come through?
Nothing has come up that I've seen, so I think you're good.
All right. Well, I think we have hit all our questions. Could you take a few minutes to wrap up? Tell us anything we've missed that you want to mention, and how we can be supportive of your campaign and your your forward motion. Thank you.
Well, you asked me for the most important, but there's so many things that need to be done. I would like to talk about food security and childcare. Food security, we got a great presentation from the food bank of Thurston Food Bank, as well as the Thurston Conservation District, that said that if we spent $6 to $18 million a year, we could feed all the hungry in Thurston County. You can't build but one housing unit. So we need to really start tackling and rolling up our sleeves. What does food security mean? What does it look like? How can we tie it to our affordable housing? Like, I would love to see what Habitat Humanity could do with the parcel of property with the Thurston Conservation District, where we could build affordable housing and a working urban farm all on the same property, so that we have food security baked into affordable housing. I think that needs to be tackled by the legislature. And I think we should also be looking at urban farmland that gets developed, because I told you we need to do density. Well, we have wetland offsets. We need to pass statewide urban farm offsets. So the developer either has to purchase land out in the county and turn it over to a land trust, a farming trust, or put money into a fund that would help educate for future farmers. Childcare, affordable childcare. 1 in 10 families right now that has at least one member of the 2-member family, or if they're even a single parent, are not able to work because the cost of childcare has gotten so astronomical. We need to start working on the state jumping into affordable childcare. What does this look like? How do we fund it? How do we tie it to the affordable housing projects as well as food security? I think it has to be dealt with. If we can do those two things, we can bring along the living wage, the housing, food security, and the childcare. We can have a better sustainable economy. Those are going to also have to be done. Now, one last thing I'll say before I wrap it up. I voted for rent stabilization in the city of Olympia, and I'm not ashamed of it. We have a crisis. 16,000 people, say that, 16,000 people in the city of Olympia are one paycheck away from being homeless. And that's based on the Alice report, because we have about 32,000 people who are renters. 54% of those are at risk. They're paying way over 30% of their salary. We need to make sure that they don't get displaced. And as a business owner, if I've increased my prices 38 to 40% every year, I would be out of business. The landlords at this time, that's what they're doing on average in Olympia, 38 to 40% per year, per unit. 7% is above what I raised my prices every year. So 7% per year should be economically achievable by the landlord, and it's predictable for the renters. And I don't want 16,000 people that any one moment, any one month could become homeless. So I think this legislature needs to tackle, roll their sleeves up, pass the rent stabilization. It is the only way to go. When we have 38% of the people in Washington as renters, this is feeding into our homelessness problem. We absolutely need to do that. If we need to figure out how to support the landlords that we have with funding to help with rent, we will need to roll up our sleeves and figure that out as well. So why am I here? I feel passion to give back to my community. I have learned a lot in the last 6.5 years. I have a lot more to learn. Believe me, I understand that. This has been a learning process. I can't wait to learn it from Beth and Jess and all the other mentors that I've already met. And I want to give back to my community. I want to see it as a better place when I finally stop being in policy.
Thank you. And I'm afraid we're gonna go back to questions really briefly because a couple of folks thought of things that they did want to know. If that's all right with you, Lisa, we
Sure.
have a few more minutes if you're open to a couple more.
Yeah.
But thank you for that wonderful wrap up there. So John Suzanne was wondering, going back to the nurse ratio question, how you would implement a nurse ratio.
Well, that's a tough one. I think there are three ways to govern: by example, by incentive, and by legislation. Honestly, Oregon and California tried everything they could, and they just had to legislate it. What is the optimum nurse ratio to patient? I think you have to have a phase in of this. It can't be all at once, because we don't have enough nurses. But we can tell CEOs of hospital corporations, by this amount of time, you need to have these nursing ratios. The stories I've been hearing are horrifying about not having those ratios. I go look at St. Pete's in the hallway, for example, the beds and no nurses. So one, we just have to legislate it. I'll be right up front. I know that they're in the process of looking at what these committees in the hospitals can achieve, which is a nurse, half management. But the problem with these committees is the CEO can overturn anything this committee comes up with for ratios for the hospitals. So unless we are able to say, this is the ratios, just like Oregon and California, and this is how we're going to phase it in, I'm not sure we'll get there. And that's the problem. So how do we do that also? How do we get that passed? I've talked to the fire unions. Do you know what firefighters are doing a good portion of their time now? They're going to long-term care facilities that are no longer hiring nurses, because they can call a paramedic to put an IV line back in, or get a patient off the toilet into a wheelchair, because that's an RN's job. So we could get the fire unions, and we could bring in the Washington Labor Council. We could put enough pressure on the legislature after they get done with its most recent try at these committees and put in nursing ratios. And go right down to Oregon and California, pull their bills, and see what we need to do with Washington law, and put it on the floor and see what happens.
Thank you for revisiting that and giving us a little more detail. I'm going to just defer to our comm team and just ask if we have time for one more question. I do see one more in the chat. Sharon?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
We do? Okay, that's great. Thank you. So Carla Wolfsburg wanted to ask why EVs are lowest on your list when there are many low-cost used EVs and they're going down. EVs save people money and reduce fossil fuel emission. If people in apartment buildings had free EV charging, that would be a major incentive to investing in an EV. Could you please comment on that information?
Carla's absolutely right. The problem is which one do we go after first? I think with just a short, the question was, how I answered was, what's the most immediate thing we need to do? That was the answer. EVs, I absolutely 100% believe in it. That's why the city of Olympia passed a model ordinance, which I think actually should be across the whole state of Washington, which is every single multifamily housing unit over 2 units has to have a certain number of EV ready, EV capable, and EV current charging stations, so that we can allow renters and hopefully one day condos be able to have electric vehicles. I personally think that all of our bike racks that we require in every development should have a plug in it, because I have an electric bike, but it's hard for me to find a plug that I can charge my bike with. Carla, you're absolutely right. The other thing, if I can go into my skilled labor training, do you know why Volkswagen dealership does not sell more electric vehicles than they do? Because they don't have electric vehicle mechanics. So we absolutely need to use the new market theater and skilled labor training to start training the electric engine mechanics, so that we can actually expand the number that we have in here. If they're used, we're going to need those mechanics even more. So I know for a fact we're short on that in our county. So if we're short in that in our county, except for Seattle and Portland, those are the ones that I know have adequate. We need to start training those so we can have EV vehicles. You're absolutely right, Carlo. I would, if I could do everything, I would do it all at once. And I would get rid of roads so that only EV vehicles, but that's in my wonderland. So
Wouldn't it be wonderful we could do everything all at once? Uh, we're almost out of time, but just very briefly, how can we best help your campaign?
Well, the thing that I really love about Olympia Indivisible is the passion that your membership brings, the volunteership, the doorbelling, the house parties, the getting the word out about what this is all about. I have deep respect for Olympia Indivisible and the members who started this, and just being able to say that I have their support will go a long ways. But the volunteership, the getting the word out, posting forums, whatever it is, I will take it because it comes with your name and it's incredibly important to me.
Thank you so much for being here and for answering our questions tonight, Lisa. It's been very interesting.